Hey guys, tonight we're heading back in time to one of the most chaotic, smelly, strangely social places in medieval Europe, the local tavern. You're not walking into a Michelin-star gastropub. No one's slicing lemons into your water or handing you a cocktail list. You're arriving on foot, blistered and sunburnt after a day of trying to not die on the road. The air is hot. Your back aches and your socks, well, they're made of rough wool and probably full of mud, hay, or worse. Dust clings to your skin like a second tunic. You're thirsty, but not the refreshing grab a lemonade kind of thirsty. This is please dash don't single quotes tea dash make dash me dash drink dash more dash ditch dash water. Thirsty. You're on the outskirts of a medieval market town. Not London or Paris, somewhere smaller, where chickens outnumber people and half the buildings lean like they're tired. The sun's dropping fast, casting long shadows over the rutted path ahead. You've heard there's a tavern in this town, and frankly, you're praying it's not just a rumor. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're still with me, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when people are tuning in. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge past low stone walls and a goat with a stare that says, "Don't test me." You follow the noise, shouting, clinking, a faint off-key fiddle in the distance. The ground underfoot is uneven packed earth, horse droppings, and the occasional mystery puddle that might just be someone's chamber pot contribution. You step wide. Your destination comes into view. A squat timber building with smoke curling from the chimney, and a sign swinging above the door. It's crudely painted, possibly depicting a fox, possibly a man with a tail. It's hard to tell in the fading light. The place leans ever so slightly, as if the ground can't quite decide whether to hold it up or swallow it whole. Out front, two men argue loudly over what sounds like the price of a chicken, while a third sleeps face down in a pile of straw. A dog licks his ear. You try not to stare. Medieval taverns weren't glamorous, and they definitely weren't consistent. Depending on the century and country, they might be called alehouses, inns, or public houses. But generally they were the social heartbeat of any village or town where you went to get news, get drunk, and sometimes get robbed. You take a deep breath, instantly regret it, and step toward the door. Let's pause here for a moment, because the idea of just going somewhere for a drink in the Middle Ages was a bit more complicated than you might think. For starters, you likely didn't have coins. You might be trading labor, a chicken, or a strip of leather you swear is worth half a pint. Tavern keepers had to be part landlord, part judge, and part locksmith. The ale was brewed on site or nearby, often thick, warm, and sometimes flecked with things you didn't want to look at too closely. And you? You probably smell bad. Everyone does. Hygiene is optional. Soap exists, yes, but most people use lye or ashes. You might have rinsed off in a river 3 towns back, maybe. So when you walk up to a tavern and the locals turn to look, you blend in. Historians still argue whether rural taverns were truly inclusive community hubs, or if they reinforced the rigid class and gender boundaries of medieval society. What we do know is that who you are and who you're with can change everything about your welcome. Traveling alone? Suspicious? Too well dressed? A mark? Too poorly dressed? A beggar? It's a narrow social lane. You hear laughter erupt inside. Something crashes. The door slams open as a man stumbles out clutching a wooden mug and laughing to himself. You instinctively step aside as he belches and veers toward the shadows. You're pretty sure his pants are on backward. You take one last glance around. Behind you, the village street is quieting, save for the occasional cluck of a hen settling. In for the night. Ahead, the tavern pulses with candlelight, noise, and the promise of something comfort, danger, or just a dry place to sit. You reach for the heavy wooden door. It sticks a little. You shove harder, and just like that, you're inside. The door slams shut behind you with a satisfying thunk, and you're instantly swallowed by warmth, noise, and smells that ride the line between nostalgic and deeply alarming dot. It's dim inside, only a few tallow, candles guttering in iron sconces. Along the walls, a fire crackles in a stone hearth to your left, its smoke curling into the rafters and lingering like a cloud of burnt bacon and damp socks. The scent of ale, unwashed bodies, old straw, and something meat-adjacent clings to every beam. The room is low and crooked. Nothing is symmetrical. The ceiling sags. The tables are all different heights, and the floor is made of compacted dirt, strewn with sawdust, bones, and is that a single boot? A quick scan reveals maybe a dozen people. Peasants with muddy boots, tradesmen in rough tunics, a traveling merchant whispering into his cup, and a child asleep under a table with a chicken perched on his back. No one seems to be actively bleeding, which you count as a good omen. You've made it to the tavern, but let's be clear, this is not a place for cocktails and conversation. You are here because you are tired, thirsty, cold, or trying to avoid sleeping outdoors next to a pigsty again, possibly all four. The space you've just entered would likely have been known as the tap room, the main drinking and eating area. The walls are wooden planks chinked with straw and mud. One window is partially shuttered with what looks like a flattened shield. Another is just open. There's no glass. It's the 1300s, and unless you're royalty, glass is a fantasy. Airflow is achieved via gaps in the wall and an unhinged door, flapping somewhere in the back. Your eyes adjust just in time to notice a pile of straw near the hearth. A man is curled there, snoring loudly. He might be asleep. He might be dead. Nobody seems concerned. Dot to your right is the bar, or what passes for one. It's more of a plank nailed across two barrels. Behind it stands the tavern sign itself, a slab of a man with a forehead like a battering ram and arms like cured ham hocks. His tunic is stained with something brownish red. Let's hope it's wine. He eyes you without blinking. You get a tight nod. It's the medieval equivalent of welcome, behave. Taverns in this era were often family-run. The owner or tavern keeper might live upstairs with their spouse and 12 inexplicably identical children. Many alehouses were technically just people's homes with a bench out front and a jug of weak beer. But this place, this one's a proper hub. First drink's a penny, the tavern keeper grunts, wiping something from a cup with a rag that's clearly never met soap. Second one costs twice as much if you ask what's in it. You nod solemnly. It's good to establish respect. Historians still argue whether taverns were seen as moral dangers or necessary evils. The church often railed against them, citing drunkenness and gambling as sins. But even monks were caught sneaking into alehouses after hours. Go figure, Dot, you take a step further inside and realize everyone's looking at you now. Just for a second, not hostile, just curious. You're a newcomer, and newcomers always draw attention, especially if you're traveling alone. Your clothes are dust-covered. Your belt pouch is suspiciously empty, but you're standing tall, and your boots match. That counts for something. Dot. In one corner, a group of men play some kind of dice game, swearing quietly and slapping the table. One rolls a pair of knuckle bones and groans. Another laughs and pockets what might be a handful of actual teeth. Dot. At the far end of the room, near a window stuffed with sheepskin, a woman knits while drinking straight from a wooden pitcher nearly the size of her head. She doesn't stop knitting when she glares at you. Multi-tasking. Taverns like this often doubled as informal inns, boarding houses, message centers, and occasionally post offices if you didn't mind your letter arriving sticky and 3 weeks late. News from distant towns was shared here. So were rumors, songs, and sometimes lice. There's no music playing at the moment, but a lute leans in the corner, missing a string, and someone's tapping out a slow rhythm on a tin mug. The fire crackles. A few voices mumble in Norman French, or Middle English, depending on the region and century. This tavern could be anywhere from Yorkshire to Rouen. A man stands to relieve himself in the corner bucket. No one blinks. You take a step back. Dot. In the middle of it all stands a cat, gray, missing one eye, tail twitching like it's plotting your demise. It stares at you, then leaps up onto a table and starts eating something. You're not sure if that was food or a former customer. Still, there's something comforting about the chaos. It's noisy, yes, filthy, undoubtedly, but it's alive. And in the medieval world, alive is a victory. You take a seat at an empty table, well, half empty. A man with a suspiciously round belly and no visible eyebrows glances up, grunts, and returns to his drink. He's clutching what might be a turnip. The candle flickers. You exhale. You're here. You made it. Dot. And possibly you're about to make several questionable decisions that will haunt you until the next morning. But for now, you lean back, listen to the low drone of the room, and let the smell of burning tallow and boiled onions lull you into something resembling peace. The candle on your table wobbles as a gust of wind slips in through a crack in the doorframe. You shiver. Not because it's cold, though it is, but because the tavern, despite its noise and clatter, feels strangely like a stage where you've been cast in the role of suspicious outsider. You tuck your hands into your sleeves and try to look like you belong. Whatever that means. Your boots squelch softly as you shift in your seat. The floor beneath you is dirt, yes, but well trodden, packed hard over years of spilled drink, boot heels, and the occasional bar fight. Every now and then someone wanders by, a mug in each hand, and glances at you just a second too long. You decide it's time to order something. You approach the bar plank over barrels. Remember, and the tavern keeper grunts again. He hasn't moved much since you arrived. His eyes squint like he's sizing you up for a coffin or a bet. What'll it be? He asks. Then, as if struck by divine inspiration, "We've got ale, more ale." You nod solemnly. Ale sounds good. He scoops up a wooden mug and dunks it into a bucket behind the bar. It's not quite a cask, not quite a cauldron. You're pretty sure it used to hold eels. Foam sloshes over the edge as he shoves the mug toward you. You hand over a coin. He bites it, shrugs, drops it into a tin box under the counter that makes a noise like it's already full of regrets. Here's the thing. In the medieval world, ale wasn't a luxury. It was life support. The water was often unsafe to drink, especially near towns where waste flowed freely through the streets. Ale, boiled during brewing, was safer though not stronger. Most everyday ale was weak, often under 2% alcohol, and referred to as small ale. Basically beer's sleepy cousin. But this is not small ale. You take a cautious sip. It's warm, thick, vaguely sweet, but also sour. There's a note of something earthy: moss, burnt barley, regret. You try not to make a face. Everyone's watching. "Brewed it myself," the tavern keeper says proudly, scratching something on his neck that might be alive, "with bog water and smoked oats." You nod, respectfully. You pretend to enjoy the drink and return to your table. Your taste buds will never forgive you, but you're officially part of the room now. Historians still argue whether medieval ale had much consistency. Recipes varied wildly depending on the region, the brewer, and how recently their goat had wandered into the mash. Some ales were flavored with herbs like yarrow, nettles, or rosemary before hops became common in Europe. Others were so thick they could double as soup. You glance around and spot a man across the room sipping something much darker from a clay cup. You ask a passing woman what it is. She glances at you, amused. "That's mead." "You ain't ready for mead." Noted. Taverns weren't exactly licensed establishments back then either. In many towns, alewives, yes, often women, brewed and sold their own drink straight from their homes. The church and local authorities constantly tried to regulate the strength, price, and quality, but compliance was, let's say, creative. You sip again. Still warm, still mysterious, but it's growing on you, or numbing you. Hard to tell. At the far end of the bar, someone coughs aggressively and spits into the fire. Sparks leap upward. A few heads turn, then turn back. You realize how easy it is to vanish in a place like this. As long as you don't cause trouble, you're just another shadow with a mug. Just then, the door bangs open and a gust of cold air sweeps through. Everyone groans. A new figure enters hooded, soaked with rain. He nods at no one in particular and beelines to the back corner, boots squishing with each step. No one asks his name. No one cares. This is how it works. You return to your seat and clutch your drink like a medieval security blanket. The warmth spreads down your throat and settles low in your belly. It's not a pleasant drink exactly, but it feels like it might keep you alive through the night. That counts for something. And then, just as you're settling in, someone shouts from the bar, "No more credit, Thomas. Pay or drink your own bath water." The room laughs. Thomas. The man with one boot mutters something under his breath and stumbles toward the door. He's holding a mug. Whether he paid for it or plans to is unclear. You sip again. The drink is mellowing. Or maybe you are. Historians still debate whether taverns were truly democratic spaces. Some argue they were among the only places where peasants and merchants, beggars and minor nobles could sit under the same roof. Others insist that even in alehouses, status followed you like a shadow: who you sat with, how you paid, whether the barkeep gave you the good mug or the cracked one. You looked down at your mug. Definitely cracked. Still, there's something quietly magical about the place. No one is checking their sundials. No one is rushing out the door. You're all just here, in the flickering half-light, sharing space, smells, stories, and whatever. It is in this cup you lean back, let the noise wash over you, and maybe, just maybe, you order a second drink. You're halfway through your second ale, or what you've decided to call liquid haybread with mood effects, when the tavern keeper gives you a look. Not unfriendly, not exactly friendly either. More like the way a butcher glances at a chicken before deciding whether to chop it or let it live another day. He wipes his hands on his apron, which does nothing to make them cleaner, and approaches your table. You new to this road? He asks, voice like gravel dragged across old leather. You nod. Passing through? Another nod. You keep it vague. In medieval taverns, oversharing is a sport best left to drunk monks. He leans on the table, and the candle flares briefly in protest. Name's Willem. I keep this place standing, mostly by yelling at it and kicking out goats. You manage a smile. Willem straightens up and gestures toward the wall behind him. You get coin. You sleep upstairs. You don't, you sleep wherever you fall. It's the medieval welcome package. As he walks off, a small figure hustles past. Your table carrying a wooden bowl. The serving girl, no older than 10, is quick-footed and sharp-eyed. She places the bowl in front of a bearded man with missing teeth, and then disappears behind the curtain separating the kitchen from the rest of the room. You hear clattering, a chicken squawk, and something that sounds like a slap-dot tavern keeping in the Middle Ages wasn't glamorous, but it was a real profession. Owners like Willem were expected to provide food, drink, lodging, and on occasion, justice. If a fight broke out, the tavern keeper often stepped in not because he was noble, but because broken furniture meant lost income. You glance around. There's a thick stick leaning behind the bar. Not ornamental. Historians still argue. You recall whether tavern keepers held true legal authority or just acted the part when things got rowdy. Either way, if Willem says you're cut off, you are cut off. There's no appeals process. At the other end of the room, someone begins to snore. Loudly, you follow the sound to a man slumped over his mug, which he appears to be cuddling like a child. No one bothers him. No one moves to help. This is just the natural order. Behind the bar, Willem resumes pouring drinks. His hands move automatically, knowing each mug by shape, heft, or superstition. He eyes every coin. Carefully fake currency was common, and once in a while, someone tried to pay in buttons or dried fish. It's not long before another stranger enters the tavern. This one's a woman, tall, veiled, with the confident air of someone who's been in worse places than this. She doesn't remove her hood, doesn't speak, just sits at the bar and receives a mug of something darker than yours. She pays in silence. You want to ask who she is, but you get the sense that even asking would cost you. Taverns weren't just for peasants. Merchants, mercenaries, travelers, even clergy passed through. Many owners kept guest books or at least mental ledgers of regulars, troublemakers, and wealthy clients to flatter. Some travelers brought letters of introduction. You? You just have that cracked mug and the stink of the road. Still, you're not doing too badly. Willem moves back across the room, stopping to exchange a few words with the dice players. He pulls a coin from one man's ear and pockets it. The man doesn't seem surprised. In the corner, a low growl erupts not from a dog, but from two men arguing over something neither of them can pronounce. One slams his mug down hard. The other stands. Here we go. But before anything escalates, Willem barks a single word. Enough. And both men freeze. One grumbles, one sits. The moment passes. The tavern exhales. It's oddly theatrical, like everyone here knows their part. And Willem? He's the director. You think back to the role of tavern keepers throughout history. Some became minor celebrities. In larger towns, they were trusted informants for local authorities. In border regions, they might act as spies. And in one strange case, a woman named Mother Louse in 17th century England ran a tavern and a gossip empire, delivering half-truths with every bowl of stew. You wonder if Willem has a similar side hustle. You wouldn't put it past him. Just then, he returns to your table with another mug. You didn't ask for one. He sets it down, shrugs. On the house, you look like you've got stories. You raise the mug in a silent toast and sip. This one tastes slightly better, still thick, still warm, but maybe less barnyard and more toasted despair. Willem watches you a moment longer, then ambles off to scold someone for trying to carve their initials into the table. You glance down. The wood is already a forest of scars, names, dates, symbols, curses. A kind of unofficial tavern history, carved in shaky, inebriated lines. You find one that reads, Tom drank here. Tom left lice. Double quotes. Poetry. The candle on your table is burning lower now. The light flickers across the uneven walls, illuminating. Old stains, shadows, and cobwebs no one seems interested in disturbing. You lean back. The ale is doing its job. Your shoulders relax. Your mind begins to blur pleasantly at the edges. You're no longer the outsider. For now, you're just another shadow, just another story tucked into the smoky corners of the room. And somehow that feels safe. The second, drink well. Third, if you count the one Willem delivered uninvited, is starting to settle in your limbs like warm lead. Not heavy in a bad way, more like your bones have remembered they exist and have voted for early retirement. You glance around and realize that what felt chaotic before is starting to make sense. The murmur of voices blends with the crackle of the hearth. The squeal of a chair leg dragging across dirt doesn't even startle you anymore. You're adapting, or maybe just mildly buzzed. Time to try your luck at ordering food. You shuffle back toward the bar and raise your eyebrows at Willem, who's currently busy wiping out a mug with a rag that could double as a medieval crime scene. He looks up. Hungry? You nod. We've got stew. You wait. That's it. You nod again. He disappears through the curtain into what passes for a kitchen. A few moments later, a bowl emerges, steam rising from it like the spirit of bad decisions. He slaps it onto the bar in front of you with a wooden spoon that's seen better centuries. You carry it back to your table carefully, like it might. slosh or hiss. It smells, okay? Meaty, herbal, vaguely of old onions. Possibly turnip. Possibly turnip's evil twin. Here's a little-known truth. Tavern food in the Middle Ages was rarely fresh, never fancy, and sometimes fatal. Meals were bulk affairs, stews made with whatever was available. Scraps of mutton, a bit of barley, cabbage that should have been eaten 2 days ago, but still crunches if you don't ask questions. Salt was used liberally, not for flavor, for survival. You dip your spoon in. The consistency is somewhere between porridge and cement. The taste? Actually, not bad. Warm, filling, a bit too salty. But in a world where dinner often meant black bread and hope, this counts as gourmet dot across the room. A man gnaws on what you think is a boiled root. His eyes meet yours like he's daring you to judge. You return to your spoon. Historians still argue whether tavern food was for locals or primarily intended for travelers. Some argue that rural taverns mainly offered drink, and food was a bring-your-own situation. Others point to archaeological finds, fish bones, charred, red, even animal teeth as proof that food was part of the package deal. There's also the issue of who cooked. In many alehouses, the tavern keeper's wife, daughter, or servant girl prepared meals. Recipes weren't written down. You learned by watching and guessing. So when someone says just like mother used to make, it could be a warning. Just then the serving girl reappears same child as before, carrying a fresh loaf of dark bread. She places it on your table without a word, then vanishes again. You tear off a piece. It's dense, hard. You could probably use it as a weapon if things go sideways. But it's bread. And bread is life. You keep eating. Midway through your bowl, you crunch something. Not gravel. Not bone. Just something. You pause, chew slowly, and swallow like a champion. This is not the time to be fragile. You glance around again, dot in the far corner. A monk is quietly counting coins. His robes are worn. His sandals look like they've walked across a continent. He doesn't drink, just sits, watches, records something in a little book. No one bothers him. You suspect even Willem doesn't mess with monks. They tend to know things, or hold grudges for eternity. Dot to your left. A pair of men are arguing over who owns a goose. The goose is not present. This does not stop them from nearly coming to blows. Willem barks at them again, and both retreat like scolded schoolboys. Room, once rowdy, now simmers. People are fed, or at least less hungry. Some recline on benches. One man is sprawled on the floor near the hearth, his head on a rolled-up cloak, drooling peacefully. You're tempted to join him. Medieval taverns often function as social equalizers, but only up to a point. Class mattered. If you were a knight or minor noble, you might dine at a separate table. Better food, cleaner plates, maybe even meat with actual seasoning. But here in the common room, everyone chews from the same pot, metaphorically and otherwise. And the drinks? Still flowing. A new round of mugs makes its way through the room. Someone singing, now badly but enthusiastically, a song about a pig who stole a bishop's boots. It's vulgar, it's catchy, and within 2 verses, half the room's humming along. You lean back, your bowl empty, your stomach cautiously optimistic. Outside, the wind picks up. The shutter bangs against the wall. No one flinches. It's just the The world reminding you that winter exists, that wolves roam, that roads are dangerous. But here, in this crooked, smoky room, there's warmth and food, and most dangerously dash comfort. You lick your spoon. One last mouthful, one last sip from your mug. You feel full, and not just with stew. You've found, at least for tonight, a place to rest. The bench creaks beneath you as you shift, trying to stretch your legs without knocking over your mug or the snoring man now slumped against your side like your old friends. He reeks of onions and boiled wool, and he may have just murmured something about shoes made of bread. You let him be. This tavern isn't just filled with food and drink, it's packed with people. Not the polished, romanticized villagers from a historical drama. These are real, crusty, uneven folk. You're sharing a bench with the kind of crowd that makes you instinctively check your coin pouch every 5 minutes. To your left is the widow. You spotted her earlier, veiled, quiet, hands folded in her lap like she's waiting for a funeral that never ends. She hasn't touched her drink, just watches. To your right, still drooling, is your turnip-scented benchmate. Across the table, a bald man with soot-smudged cheeks stares into space, muttering numbers. A blacksmith? A tax collector? A lunatic? Possibly all three. His knuckles are raw, and he sips his ale like it's medicine. In the far corner, a group huddles around the dice game. Again, you notice one player palming something suspiciously, cube-shaped beneath the table. Another shouts. A third accuses. The tension spikes but breaks into laughter. False alarm. Or maybe it's just not worth the fight. Yet, medieval taverns were the original social media, minus the selfies and plus the fleas. Gossip was currency. If you wanted to know who married whom, who died last Thursday, or who owes a baker 3 chickens and a curse, this is where you found out. You catch snippets of conversation, double quotes, His cow gave birth to twins, both with one eye. They say the abbot's niece has been seen at the docks. Double quotes, and then she drops the eel right in the bishop's soup. It's impossible to follow it all. The stories flow like the ale, some true, some exaggerated, all deeply unnecessary. Historians still argue whether these places served as informal record keepers. In towns without newspapers or reliable messengers, taverns became the unofficial archive. Your life's biggest events were toasted, whispered, or shouted across these grimy tables. Suddenly, the door bangs open again and everyone turns. A hunched figure enters, wrapped in a cloak that looks more like a stitched-together sack. His beard is long, wild, and probably sentient. He shuffles toward a stool and slaps a wooden charm onto the table. People murmur. Someone mutters bonesman. You've stumbled upon a traveling gambler, or healer, or conman. The difference is mostly spelling. He pulls out a pouch, spills a few carved stones across the table, and starts predicting someone's future. The woman with the pitcher giggles. The monk scowls. A dog, possibly the tavern's, possibly just a regular, wanders in through a side door. Mangy, 3-legged, and clearly more respected than half the people here. It limps toward the fire, flops down with a sigh, and promptly begins licking its remaining paw with purpose. You glance back toward the dice table just as someone yells. The laughter is gone. Chairs scrape. A man stands, fist clenched. Wileum doesn't move. Instead, the dog barks once. Somehow that's enough. The man sits. The game resumes. You suspect that dog has seen things. You shift again, trying to give. Your rib cage more breathing room. The stew's sitting like a warm stone in your gut. You take a sip of your drink cooler now, flatter, and let your gaze wander. The ceiling is low, blackened by centuries of smoke. Dried herbs dangle from the heat. Rafters lavender, wormwood, maybe sage, or maybe just random weeds someone insisted had magical properties. Superstition is thick in the air, like the scent of old meat. You recall hearing once that some taverns kept charms above the door, dried animal parts, talismans, even horse skulls to ward off evil spirits or tax collectors. Possibly both. You glance up. There's a bundle of twigs tied with red string nailed above the hearth. You decide not to ask. The widow shifts. You hadn't realized she was watching you until now. Her eyes, dark and unreadable, flick away. She stands, smooth as fog, and walks toward the back stairs. Everyone moves aside like it's instinct. You wonder how many of these people know each other. Some must be regulars, others just passers-by. But there's a rhythm here, a choreography, a mutual understanding that this place, smoky, cracked, creaking, is home. At least for a night. Someone taps your shoulder. You turn. It's the little serving girl again, holding out a crust of bread. For you? For the dog? Unclear. You take it. She disappears. The man across from you clears his throat. Where you headed? You blink. It's the first direct question anyone's asked you all night. You hesitate. South, you say. Maybe. He nods like that's an answer. Watch the roads near the hills. Wolves and worse. You nod back. He returns to his drink. In the background, someone starts humming a low, tuneless melody that sounds like it's been passed down from one snoring farmer to another for centuries. A few voices join in. It becomes a lullaby of sorts. You lean back, close your eyes briefly. Not to sleep, just to rest. The world doesn't stop, but inside the tavern, it slows. You're not sure how long your eyes have been closed. Seconds? Minutes? But the tavern has shifted again. The quiet hum has given way to something livelier. Someone's pulled out a fiddle scratched, missing a peg, but still capable of carrying. A tune. The sound slices through the haze of smoke and chatter like a thread pulling everything tighter. A beat follows wooden spoons on a tabletop, the rhythmic clack of boot heels on the packed earth. And just like that, the evening entertainment begins. The fiddler is an old man with a back like a question mark and fingers like twigs. His hair sprouts in wild tufts and his mouth curls in a permanent smirk, like he's playing for secrets, not applause. His eyes are cloudy, possibly blind, but his hands are precise. The music he plays is rough, fast, oddly hypnotic-like. Lullaby sung by someone who's never slept. A limp dog. You suspect it's the same one from earlier. Lets out a howl in time with the music. Someone laughs. Someone else shouts, "He's better than you were last week, Owen." And the room ripples with good-natured jeers. Entertainment in a medieval tavern was rarely planned. You didn't buy a ticket. You didn't get a program. You got whatever the crowd brought: music, stories, juggling, knife tricks, or, in one notable case, a man who claimed his pig could recite psalms. It could not. Tonight it's the fiddle and a bit of foot stomping. A woman with calloused hands and copper earrings begins to clap along, leading a round of slurred verses to a song that's clearly about ale, sheep, or a confusing combination of both. It's catchy. You find your toe tapping. Historians still argue whether taverns employed entertainers or simply tolerated them. Some inns in major towns had bards, minstrels, even professional storytellers. In smaller villages, it was usually a local who got tipsy enough to sing, or someone passing through who wanted a warm meal and didn't mind dancing on a table. A tall man, probably a traveler like you, stands up and starts performing what appears to be a dramatic retelling of his own haircut. It involves wild hand gestures, suspicious barber behavior, and at least 3 sound effects. The audience eats it up. A few coins land on the table in front of him. He pockets them with a bow dot. It's at this point that someone tosses a handful of peas at the fiddler, who stops playing, glares into the vague direction of the culprit, and mumbles, "You'll choke on your next potato." A cheer goes up. The tavern for a moment is alive with the kind of joy that only exists in places where everything else is a little broken. And then someone begins a drinking chant. Up she goes, and down again, ale for me, and who needs men? A dozen voices echo the line. The verses vary wildly. Some rhyme, some don't. One man adds a line about frogs that makes no sense but earns applause. You sip your now lukewarm ale and watch as the widow from earlier claps, along with surprising rhythm. Even the monk in the corner seems to smile briefly before. Bearing his face and his hood again, in many ways this was the medieval equivalent of Netflix. You didn't choose what was on. You didn't always understand the plot, but it kept you engaged and mildly confused. You're pulled from your thoughts as someone stumbles into your bench, nearly spilling your drink. He catches himself, offers a hand in apology, and immediately launches into a story about his cartwheel accident involving a goat, 3 loaves of bread, and a misread recipe for soap. You nod politely. The story ends with a burp and a satisfied sigh. He wanders off. You get the sense that nobody here is worried about tomorrow. There are no planners, no itineraries. Just now and now and now again. The fiddle picks up, faster this time. A beat that borders on frantic. A woman stands on a stool and starts spinning in slow circles, arms raised, skirt catching the candlelight. It's not graceful, it's not rehearsed, but it's real. And somehow it's beautiful. The dog howls again. Jug is passed around. You take a cautious sip. It's sweet, strong, definitely mead. You immediately understand why Willem warned you that mead, the honey wine of choice for centuries, was often stronger than ale and occasionally brewed by monks, which explains the aftertaste of divine punishment. Still, it burns in a nice way. You take another sip. Foolishly, someone claps your back a little too hard, and now you're part of a conga line minus the music, and with twice the ankle injuries. You circle the room once, then escape back to your table before it turns into a pile-on. The fiddler pauses to drink. The noise fades slightly, and then, for a fleeting second, it's quiet. You look around. The tables, the floor, the benches, they're all still full. But for this moment, the tavern exhales. You do too. This is how medieval people survived the darkness, literal and otherwise. Not with comfort, not with safety, but with noise, heat, laughter, song, and the company of others who were just as tired, just as hungry, and just as desperate to forget that the outside world was cold, dangerous, and deeply unfair. Inside these crooked walls, things make a strange kind of sense. You rest your head in your hands, listening to the fiddle start. Up again, and for the first time all day, you don't feel like you're surviving. You feel like you're part of something. The warmth from the fire, the haze of mead, the fiddler's relentless bowing, it's all starting to melt into one continuous swirl of sensation. You blink slowly, once, twice, and then you feel it. Something brushes your foot. You jerk instinctively, toes recoiling inside your boot. Was it the dog? A person? A hallucination brought on by turnip stew and cheap alcohol? You glance down. Nothing, just shadows and straw. But the feeling lingers a little too soft to be wood, too dry to be cloth. You shuffle your feet inward just in case. You're not alone in reacting. The man across from you has paused mid-sentence. He was describing, in excessive detail, the time he sneezed during confession. He frowns beneath his bushy brows and slowly lifts his legs onto the bench. You both look at each other. Rats, he mutters. Not just rats. Goat-sized rats, dot, or so the legend goes dot. The tavern's floor is a maze of dropped bread crusts, stew drippings, and anything unlucky enough to fall during a meal. And when darkness settles, the real locals come out. Large, bold, audacious rats that know when a tavern is too distracted to notice the twitching of their whiskers or the scraping of their claws. One scuttles across the far end of the hearth. Someone throws a spoon. It misses. The rat vanishes. Like smoke, taverns weren't hygienic. You knew this. But somehow the movement makes it real. It reminds you that you're not in a curated reenactment. You're in the Middle Ages, and things are alive in here that don't pay rent. Still, no one panics. The widow tucks up her feet and continues sipping. The fiddler plays louder. The monk, in what might be a preemptive exorcism or simply exhaustion, mutters a prayer into his cup. You relax your legs again carefully. The rats, at least, seem respectful of personal space. Meanwhile, the gambling is heating up. Dice clatter like hail on a wooden roof. Coins scrape across the table. And tempers, long marinated in ale and ego, begin to simmer. Two men are locked. In a game, one has a scar across his temple and fingers stained with what might be pitch. The other is younger, smoother, with eyes that twitch like they're trying to calculate your weight in silver. 6. One announces. Liar, the other hisses. A crowd begins to form. The mood shifts. You feel it like a pressure drop. In a thunderstorm, medieval gambling was common and illegal in many regions. Authorities issued edicts banning dice games in taverns, especially for soldiers and peasants who had an unfortunate habit of losing their wages and showing up to work with nothing but bruises and excuses. Historians still argue whether these laws were enforced or simply ignored, like most tavern curfews. In any case, this particular game is heading toward trouble. Scarface leans forward. You owe me 3 pence. Prove it, replies Twitchy. Scarface stands. The dice table shudders. As someone bumps it, a mug falls. A chair scrapes violently. Willem appears from nowhere. He doesn't shout. He doesn't lift a finger. He just stands. It's enough. Scarface grumbles. Twitchy shrugs. The dice are scooped up, and the tension slinks back into the corners, like a scolded dog. Gambling's not the only form of entertainment here. Two people in the corner are whispering deep, conspiratorial. You catch fragments, double quotes, the miller's boy talks. They single quotes, LL have to bribe the reeve, unless. The priest really saw her at the well, The kind of secrets people only share in dim light and over lukewarm ale. The kind that could ruin a family or start a brawl. You pretend not to hear in many ways. The tavern is the town's newspaper. But instead of headlines and printing presses, you get half-truths shouted over stew and scandal traded for drinks. And if things get too tense, there's always the rat. Another one darts across the room, this one dragging what might be the remains of a sausage or a very determined beetle. It distracts everyone for a moment. The conspirators pause. The gamblers sit back. Even the dog lifts its head and considers chasing it, before flopping down again with a wheeze. You sip from your mug, empty. You stare into it like the answer to something might float up. The tavern isn't just noise and heat, it's balance. 100 shifting tensions between hunger and satisfaction, laughter and violence, boredom and danger. The kind of place where things feel stable only because everyone's too tired to make them otherwise. You lean back, the bench digging into your spine, and exhale. Another rat squeaks. You let it be because, honestly, you're not sure if it's even the worst-behaved patron here. By now, you've accepted certain facts. The floor will shift beneath you. The ale will taste like wet wheat and regret. And dinner may or may not contain actual meat. But what you're still unsure about is whether you're brave enough or foolish enough to order another meal. Because now, as the fire dies down to embers and the room softens into that late evening lull, Willem reappears behind the bar and calls out in a voice loud enough to wake the monk. Stew's gone. Bread's gone, but we've got eggs. A murmur goes through the room, not excitement, not disgust. Suspicion. Eggs in a medieval tavern are not omelets. They are not scrambled with a side of roasted potatoes and herbs. They are eggs in the most literal sense, soft, boiled too long or not long enough, and sometimes already halfway toward a chicken. Someone at the far end of the room mutters, "Last time I cracked one, it stared back." You weigh your options. You are still technically hungry. The stew was filling, but it's been a while, and your body is now converting ale into something that feels like appetite. You raise a hand. Willem sees you, nods. He disappears behind the curtain again. The tavern holds its collective breath, and then, clunk, a bowl is placed before you. Inside, 2 eggs boiled hard, cracked slightly, and still warm. A smear of salt crusts one side. A spoon leans against the rim, as if to say, "Good luck." You tap one open. It resists. You tap harder. It yields with a pop. Inside, yellow-gray yolk, dense, slightly green around the edges. You eat it anyway. It tastes like protein and disappointment, with a texture somewhere between rubber and sawdust. But it's food. It fills space. It does not blink. That's enough. Tavern meals varied wildly, depending on geography, season, and the tavern keeper's mood. Some days it was eel pie. Other days dry peas soaked in broth and optimism. If you were lucky and wealthy, you might get cheese, fresh bread, or smoked fish. But for most travelers, tavern food was about one thing: not dying. Historians still argue whether food served in taverns was primarily for profit or simply an expected courtesy. Some suggest it was added as a bonus to keep drinkers around longer. Others believe it was a calculated survival mechanism, keep your patrons just full enough to not riot. You chew the second egg thoughtfully. Across the room, a man loudly orders the black bread. A moment later, a slab arrives, coarse, heavy, and likely made with a generous helping of rye, ash, and broken dreams. He eats it slowly, soaking it in ale between bites. A young couple in the corner shares a single onion and a pouch of something wrapped in linen. You suspect dried apples, or dried something. They chew like it fights back. A group of laborers, loud, red-faced, and 3 mugs past sensible, are now debating whether bad food or bad wives cause more deaths per year. The answer, according to them, is both, especially when combined. The widow has returned from wherever she disappeared to, and she sits again, this time with a slice of what looks like cold pie. You envy her slightly, until a rat peeks out from under her table. She kicks at it expertly without spilling a drop. You've finished your eggs. The spoon goes back in the bowl with a dull clink dot. You consider licking the salt from the rim. You do it. No judgment. The noise in the room lowers to a dull drone. Bellies are full or full enough. Mugs are half empty. The fiddler is snoring. Now, his instrument still on his lap. This is the closest thing the tavern gets to peace, and you're grateful for it. You lean your head against the wall behind you. It's rough, uneven, and smells like old wax and mildew. But it holds you. For now, that's enough. You remember hearing that some medieval taverns served soup from a communal pot, a cauldron, where meat, bones, and vegetables simmered endlessly, with new ingredients added daily. In theory, the same stew could bubble. For weeks, maybe months, locals called it perpetual stew. Travelers called it whatever's left. You think about that as your stomach murmurs. Not quite pain, not quite satisfaction. Just an uneasy truce between what you expected and what you got. And really, that's the entire tavern experience in a nutshell. A place that feeds you, if only a little, warms you if only for a night, and gives you a front row seat to humanity in all its smelly, strange, half-soused glory. You close your eyes for a moment, the flicker of candlelight dancing behind your lids. You're not drunk, but you're not sober either. You're something else. Something softer. Something a little easier to carry. And that, oddly enough, is exactly what you came for. You're jolted back from your half-doze by a sudden thump, the kind of sound a body makes when it hits a bench with more enthusiasm than balance. You open one eye to find that someone new has entered the tavern. Again, except this time the reaction is different. The conversations hush slightly, like a room collectively inhaling. People glance up, glance away. A woman crosses herself. Even Willem pauses mid-wipe of a mug. You turn. The newcomer is a man in dark robes, expensive fabric, trimmed in gold thread, and worn with the stiff posture of someone who doesn't get questioned often. His boots are clean, his hands soft. His belt holds a dagger that's too decorative to be useful and too sharp to be purely for show. He doesn't order anything. He just walks to the hearth and sits. A few murmurs ripple through the room. He's not supposed to be here. Someone whispers behind you, which brings us to a fundamental rule of the medieval tavern. Not everyone was allowed in. Taverns were, by design, a public space, but public didn't mean equal. Laws written and unwritten governed who could drink, where they could sit, how long they could stay, and whether they'd be thrown out by the ear or the boot. Women were often discouraged or outright banned from entering unaccompanied, unless they worked there. Clergy weren't supposed to frequent alehouses at all, though that didn't stop them. And local ordinances in some towns forbade serfs or the unwashed poor from loitering, unless they had money to spend or gossip worth trading. Historians still argue whether taverns were truly more egalitarian than other medieval institutions, or simply replicated the same hierarchies in more candlelit form. You watch the man in dark robes as he sits, unmoving, scanning the room with the calm detachment of someone used to being watched. There's a seal stitched into the edge of his sleeve. You don't recognize it. Neither does anyone else, apparently. Churchman? Someone mutters, tax officer? Another guesses. You suspect the truth is worse back in your own corner of the room. You notice a subtle shift in body language. People sit up straighter. Mugs are quietly set down instead of slammed. The dice game evaporates. The monk lowers his hood. Even the dog stops licking itself. The tavern is suddenly sober. You pick up your mug and pretend to sip. Empty, of course. Willem moves cautiously behind the bar, rearranging mugs that don't need rearranging. The robed man speaks. His voice is soft, pleasant, and dangerous. Like a lullaby you shouldn't fall asleep to. Anyone seen a man named Bastian? No one answers. He smiles. It's not a real smile. It's a dagger that wants to be light. I was told he passed through here. Silence. Then, from the farthest table a cough. You look. An old man wrapped in a blanket, eyes watery from drink, or age, or both. Bastian was here 2 nights past, he croaks. Drank 3 cups, lost a game of pins, and left with a girl. Everyone turns back to their drinks like that was the most natural statement in the world. The robed man nods once, then stands, smooth as oil. Thank you. He leaves. The door creaks, then shuts, and just like that, the tavern breathes again. The monk finishes his cup. Willem scratches his beard and mutters something about cursed boots. The old man with a blanket accepts a fresh drink from the serving girl, who says nothing and disappears again. You exhale. Hadn't realized you were holding it. This is how it goes. Some visitors are welcome, some tolerated, and others tolerated just long enough. Taverns, for all their chaos, enforce their own social codes. Not always fairly, not always gently, but predictably. If you were a local, you had a place. If you were a traveler, you earned your space by not being a problem or by being entertaining, rich, or silent. If you were nobility, you drank elsewhere, in clean halls with clean tables and servants to catch your spills. This tavern was not. For you, and yet here you are, still here, still upright, still breathing. You think back to that man's robe, the careful stitching, the way the firelight made the gold thread shimmer, and you realize The more polished someone looked in this place, the less anyone trusted them. The ones you trust? They're the ones with dirt under their nails and stories that don't end well. You shift again on the bench. The fire crackles. The fiddler stirs in his sleep, and someone in the back begins retelling the story of the time a merchant tried to pay for his beer with a duck and ended up married to a brewer's daughter. It's a terrible story. You've already heard 3 versions of it, but you listen anyway. Because in this place, the real rule isn't about class or money or religion. It's about rhythm. Knowing when to speak, when to listen, and when to sit very, very still. It starts with a chair tipping over, not a crash, not a shout, just a small, sudden shiftwood scraping dirt, then silence. That kind of silence that prickles at the back of your neck and tells you things are about to get interesting, and not. In a good way. A man stands. You recognize him. Scarface from the dice game earlier. He's sweating now, and not from the fire. His face is flushed, his eyes locked on someone across the room. You follow his gaze. Twitchy. Of course. Scarface takes a step forward. The crowd senses it before it happens. The dog slinks under a table. The monk closes his book. The dice vanish. So does any pretense of casual drinking. Give it back, Scarface growls. Twitchy doesn't answer. He just lifts his mug slowly and sips. It's the medieval equivalent of poking a bear with a spoon. Scarface lunges. The table between them flips with a clatter, sending a mug flying and a loaf of bread skidding into the fire. Twitchy grabs a bench. Leg. Someone screams. A stool crashes. And just like that, the tavern erupts. Brawls in medieval taverns weren't rare. In fact, they were practically built in. When you mix alcohol, hunger, gossip, gambling, and bruised egos in a room lit by fire and populated by men who carry knives instead of business cards, something will break. And tonight, it's order. Twitchy swings low. Scarface grabs a jug and smashes it against the floor instead of a person, which is somehow worse. Someone grabs a cloak and throws it. Someone else throws a spoon. You duck instinctively as a candle tips over and twice snuffs out. You press yourself against the wall. This is not your fight, but tavern fights. Don't care whose fight it is. A bench skids past your feet. A woman grabs her pitcher and climbs onto the bar. The widow simply disappears. One blink and she's gone. Possibly under a table. Possibly into smoke. And then Willem moves. You've never seen him fast before. He doesn't shout. He doesn't even look angry. He just arrives between Twitchy and Scarface and slams a wooden staff onto the floor. A staff you hadn't noticed before, carved from ash, wrapped in iron at the tip. Thud. The noise is louder than it should be. Final. Like a gavel. Scarface hesitates. Twitchy, wisely, takes a step back. Willem's voice cuts through the room like cold water. Settle it outside, or settle it with me. And that's when the pig appears. Yes, a pig from somewhere behind the bar, a low grunt. Then a snort. Then a pig, not massive, but solid, with a twine collar and one droopy ear, wanders into the room. It walks past the brawlers, past the spilled bread, past the man now nursing a bruised ego and a slightly broken toe. The pig stops in the middle of the room. And sits. Scarface stares. Twitchy stares. You stare. Everyone stares. Witness, Willem says, gesturing at the pig, and that's how medieval tavern justice worked. Not with courts, not with sheriffs, but with custom, presence, and apparently a pig named Agnes. Historians still argue whether animals were ever used as symbolic judges in tavern disputes. Some say it was a joke, others say it was ritual. A few point to trial records that reference cats, pigs, and even donkeys in roles that can only be described as morally supportive. In any case, Agnes stares at the two men with the blank confidence of someone who has watched far too many fights and doesn't particularly care who wins. Scarface snorts, then grins, then steps back. "I'll find him tomorrow," he says. He's not worth the pig. Twitchy, with the wisdom of someone who's seen justice delivered by livestock, nods and sits down. The room relaxes. Wilum picks up the broken bench and mutters about idiots and their dice. Agnes gets a turnip from the serving girl. Balance is restored. You, still pressed against the wall, slowly return to your seat. Your mug is sideways now, dripping what little was left into a puddle on the table. You wipe it up with the sleeve of someone else's cloak and pretend not to notice. Dog returns to its spot. The monk lifts his quill again, and you sit there thinking, did I just witness a trial? A truce? Or the strangest performance in town? Probably all three, because medieval taverns weren't just for drinking. They were the stage, the courtroom, the soap opera, and sometimes the zoo. This wasn't a rare moment. This was a Tuesday. It's getting late now. You can tell not by a clock there are none, but by the sag in people's shoulders, the softened voices, and the steady flow of patrons heading for doorways, corners, or stairwells wherever sleep can be coaxed out of splinters and straw. You rub your eyes. The tavern's smoky haze has become a permanent fixture in your vision. You've breathed it in so deeply, you're probably exhaling soot. A few candles gutter low, shadows growing longer across the warped floor. Willem leans against the bar, arms folded, watching the room like a shepherd who's lost all faith in his flock but still wants them safe. You consider your next move, which leads you to the question, where does one sleep in a medieval alehouse? If you're rich, you get a private room, a proper bed, a door with a latch, a pitcher of water that probably doesn't have a frog in it. But you are not rich. You are road-weary, stew-filled, and operating on whatever coins you didn't spend on mystery eggs. So when Willem nods toward the back stairs, you know that means you qualify for upstairs lodging, by which he means a communal room, possibly with walls, possibly without. You follow a few others, shuffling up the narrow, creaky staircase. Each step moans like it's sharing secrets from a century ago. At the top, a crooked hallway. One candle. Two doors. Both open. You pick the nearer one. Inside is a low ceiling, a single shuttered window, and 5 beds. Well bed-shaped things. Straw mattresses, roughly human length, laid out on raised wooden frames. The straw smells musty, and there's something moving in one corner that you refuse to identify. The linens, such as they are, appear to have last seen a wash during a solar eclipse, but it's horizontal, and it's yours for now. You claim the one nearest the window. Just enough airflow to feel alive. Not enough to let in a bird. You sit. The mattress sighs under your weight, releasing a small cloud of dust And what might be former lice Dot sleeping at a tavern wasn't a guarantee of rest. You were often sharing a room with strangers, merchants, traveling priests, or drunk farmers who snored like they were trying to exorcise something. There were no earplugs, no privacy curtains, no do not disturb signs, just the gentle knowledge that everyone here was equally uncomfortable. The door creaks as someone else enters. A woman, one of the barmaids by the look of her apron. She glances at you, then collapses face first onto the straw pile in the corner, fully clothed, shoes still on. You take the hint, you remove your boots. Everything else stays on. You don't trust this mattress not to bite back. You lie down. The ceiling looms about 2 feet above your face, carved with initials and what might be teeth marks. There's no candle in here, just a soft orange flicker from the stairwell. A few muffled voices rise up from the taproom below. Laughter, footsteps, a short, sharp clatter of something breaking. Then silence. The woman in the corner groans once, rolls over and begins to snore softly. You stare at the ceiling. Your back hurts, your legs ache, you shift, and the straw pokes back. You close your eyes. No dreams yet. Just sensations. The faint tongue of soot in your nose. The rough blanket beneath. Your fingers. The strange comfort of being surrounded by strangers, none of whom expect anything from you. Historians still argue whether these shared sleeping spaces were considered normal or just the least terrible option. Records show that some taverns offered floor space only, no bedding, just permission. Others charged extra for a haystack or even allowed patrons to sleep in the stable, with or without the horse. You feel lucky. Sort of. A scuffle of paws sounds beneath the floorboards. Rats, again. You sigh. If you're quiet, maybe they'll avoid your pack. Outside, the wind moans through the eaves. The shutters rattle faintly. You wonder if this place will still be standing in a decade, or if it's been crumbling slowly for the last 200 years and simply hasn't realized it yet. Your thoughts drift back to the stew, the fiddle music, the pig. How strange it all was. And how perfectly it made sense once you stopped expecting comfort and started noticing survival. The mattress shifts as someone else lies down in the next bed. You don't look. You just pull the coarse blanket up over your shoulder and breathe slowly. It's not quiet, but it's quiet enough. You think of the road waiting outside, of tomorrow's walk. And then, before you even realize it, your body finally lets go. The first thing you hear is bells, not alarm bells, not danger, just the distant, uneven clang of church bells calling the town to morning prayers, livestock duties, or general awareness that the sun is up and God is watching. Your eyes flutter. Open. Light seeps in through the warped shutters, gray, reluctant, the kind of dawn that doesn't commit to brightness, just hints at it like a shy visitor. You sit up slowly. Everything aches. Your knees protest. Your spine feels like it's been used to press cheese. You're alive, though. That's something. The room around you is quieter than expected. The barmaid in the corner is already gone. The bed beside yours is empty, save for a crushed hat and a faint smell of onions. You wonder if your roommate was ever actually there, or just a bad dream wearing shoes. You swing your legs off the straw and pull on your boots. They're still damp. Of course they are. Downstairs, the tavern breathes again. Soft clinks, low murmurs, the clatter of mugs being gathered like reluctant sheep. You descend the staircase, each step creaking under your weight like it resents you personally. Back in the main room, it's a different world. Gone is the raucous energy. The singing, the rats doing synchronized laps. What's left is the morning. Crowd, fewer people, softer voices, and a surprising number of mugs already in motion, because in medieval taverns, morning meant ale. Not necessarily by choice. Water, remember, was often unsafe. Coffee and tea hadn't arrived yet. Milk turned quickly. But ale? Ale was always ready. Ale didn't judge you for drinking it at dawn. You sidle up to the bar. Willem is already there, drying a mug with the same piece of linen that might now be older than time. He grunts in greeting. Sleep? You nod. Dreams? You shrug. He pours without asking. The mug lands in front of you with a satisfying thud. This ale is cooler, clearer. Maybe a little thinner. Morning ale, you assume. Breakfast beer. It tastes better than it has any right to. You sip as the room slowly fills again. A boy with straw in his hair delivers firewood. A woman with flour on her sleeves sweeps out a corner, managing to move equal parts, dust and bones. A man with a swollen eye mumbles thanks as Willem slides a cloth-wrapped something toward him, possibly food, possibly apology. You glance around, looking for familiar faces. Scarface is gone. Twitchy, too. The widow's seat is empty. The dog is back, curled, on the hearth like it never left. You wonder if it ever did. A monk sits alone at the same table as before, copying something into a little book with sleepy determination. His ink is nearly gone. His eyes might be Toot Dot and the pig, nowhere to be seen. You imagine she's sleeping, off a hard night of judging people. You take another sip. A man at the next table is already 3 mugs in. He's cheerful, loud, and entirely unconcerned with dignity. He's telling a story about his neighbor's attempt to ferment turnips. The story involves a cart fire, a marriage proposal, and a very surprised sheep. You pretend not to listen, but you're smiling anyway. This is what mornings in taverns were often like. Part hangover, part therapy session, part community news bulletin. You got your updates from whoever was conscious enough to remember last night and embellish it just enough to keep it interesting. Historians still debate whether tavern mornings were truly social hubs or simply places for the desperate and dehydrated. But journals and court records suggest that more than one deal, truce, confession, or sermon was made over a morning ale and a piece of bread too stale to bend. Someone sets a bowl down in front of you. Thin porridge. No spoon. You use your fingers. You do not complain. It's warm and vaguely oat-flavored. It might contain wood chips. You don't care. From somewhere outside, a rooster crows late, confused, possibly drunk. The church bells toll again, and with that, people begin to leave. Not all at once, just in trickles. The flour-dusted woman tosses the last of the ashes into the hearth and nods to Willem. The monk folds his book, bows toward no one in particular, and disappears out the door. A group of laborers rise from a far table, stretching, and muttering about fences, fields, and someone's missing wheelbarrow dot. You stay for a while longer. Your mug is still half full. The fire is still warm, and outside, the fog is lifting just enough to remind you that the world hasn't stopped waiting. Willem approaches again, slower this time, eyes a bit heavier. Back on the road? He asks. You nod. He looks you over, then hands you a crust of bread wrapped in a rag. Travel light, but eat something first. Keeps the demons out. You're not sure if he means actual demons or metaphorical ones. You don't ask. You rise. Stretch and wince. The tavern is behind you now. Almost quiet again. But just before you reach the door, you pause. You look back once. It's still crooked, still smoky, still a little too loud, a little too dark, but also somehow the safest you've felt in days. You step outside, and the door shuts behind you with a thud that sounds far more permanent than it should. The air is wet and sharp, not quite rain, not quite fog, just that heavy post-dawn chill that settles in towns like this and doesn't leave until the sun gathers enough courage to burn it off. You pull your cloak tighter, adjust your pack, and glance down the road. It's muddy, uneven, and peppered with yesterday's hoof prints, boot holes, and yes, what you sincerely hope is just turnip pulp. You start walking. Your boots squelch with each step, and for a brief moment you consider going back to the crooked warmth, to the lopsided bench, to Willem's morning ale and porridge that may or may not have contained moss. But the road calls, and as you move through the sleepy town past shuttered shops, sagging carts, and chickens who glare at you like you owe them something, you realize something strange. You miss the tavern already. Not the smell, exactly, or the food, or the seating situation that left your spine shaped like a question mark, but the rhythm of it, the way it gathered people, strangers, enemies, pilgrims, widows, and held them together, however briefly, in shared hunger, shared stories, shared warmth. Because as you pass a miller dragging a sack of flour and a boy half asleep on a donkey, you can't help but think the tavern was more than a stop. It was the town's pulse. You pass a stall with wilted cabbages and no cellar. A barrel rolled into a ditch. A cat that hisses at you from a rooftop and then immediately falls asleep. And then, in the corner of your eye, you spot something familiar. A group of men standing in a circle just outside a thatched house. They're talking, loudly, gesturing with hands, bread, even a hoe. You inch closer. They're arguing about grain prices, about whether the new reeve can be trusted, about the baker's daughter, and whether she's truly interested in the priest's sermons or just his coin pouch. They're leaning against the wall of the tavern. Not inside it anymore, but still orbiting. And that's when you realize, even in the daylight, the tavern hasn't stopped working. Now it's the town hall, the bulletin board, the whisper network. A man emerges from the doorway, arms full of empty mugs, nodding at the group like they've just voted him into office. The others grunt, mutter, keep talking. There's no ceremony, no gavel, just decision-making via gossip and proximity. You remember something you overheard last night, something about a fence needing fixing, and a man who owns the tools but not the hands. You bet that problem gets solved here. Not at church. Not in court, but with a half mug in hand and a pig acting as witness, if necessary. Historians still debate how central taverns were to medieval civic life. Some suggest they were just rest stops. Others point to countless legal records, marriage arrangements, business deals, and even peasant revolts that began over a drink. It makes sense. Where else could so many classes meet? A merchant, a thatcher, a barefoot pilgrim, a tacksman pretending to be something less hated. Everyone passed through. Eventually, you continue down the road. But as the fog thins and the sun peeks through a ragged patch of cloud, you find yourself mentally cataloging the tavern again, not as a place to eat or sleep, but as something much stranger. It was a mirror, not a flattering one, but an honest one, showing the medieval world exactly what it was: tired, hungry, loud, funny, brutal, forgiving, forgetful. You pass 2 more houses, a low wall, and then the path opens wide to the fields. Smoke rises in slow coils from chimneys behind you. The tavern's gone now visually, at least, but it lingers in your clothes, in your breath, and the dull ache behind your eyes. And maybe, if you're honest in your heart a little, you'll miss the widow's silence, the fiddler's stubborn rhythm. The child server who never spoke but always noticed, even the rats, even Agnes, the pig judge. The road ahead is long, rutted, and quiet. It smells like damp earth and the promise of more discomfort. But that's fine, because now you've had a night behind those timber walls, and somehow the world feels less empty for it. You keep walking. The bells in the distance ring again. And you wonder not if you'll find another tavern like that, but when. The road winds ahead in uneven ridges, and your feet begin to ache all over again, familiar rhythmic aches that match the beat of your steps. You pass a hedgerow where a raven watches you, utterly unimpressed. A small stream gurgles beneath. A mossy plank bridge. A signpost leans at an angle, offering confusing directions in faded Latin and woodworm handwriting. None of it matters. You're not lost. You just don't care where you're going anymore, because a strange thing happens after a night in a medieval tavern. The outside world feels quieter, larger, less urgent. The people you met, the stew you survived, the songs you didn't understand, they've stuck to you like soot in your sleeves. You're carrying them now, and they're oddly warm. It's mid-morning, but the sun still hasn't committed to shining. You pass a field dotted with sheep, each of whom seems to be considering a career change. A distant church bell rings again. Somewhere behind you, the tavern creaks on, probably already pouring someone their 4th mug. And as you walk, thoughts begin to unspool in your head. Quiet, ambling thoughts. You think about that cracked mug Willem handed you. You think about the monk writing in his little book. What was he recording? His travels, his sins, or just a list of taverns where the rats didn't try to steal his bread? You think of Agnes, the pig who presided over more justice than most courtrooms, of the widow who said nothing and missed nothing, of the serving girl who didn't need to speak to command a room. These weren't just characters. They were the story, because medieval taverns weren't about the food, or the ale, or even the roof. They were about the people who passed through. Some stayed. Most didn't. But everyone left behind something. A boot print. A song. A curse. A joke that only made sense if you'd been drunk at the time, and that includes you. You'll arrive at the next village soon. And maybe they'll have a tavern, too. Maybe it'll be better, cleaner. Maybe the stew will actually contain meat this time. But even if it's perfect, it won't be that tavern. The crooked one. The one where you first stepped inside, expecting a place to sit and found instead a whole world balancing precariously on a single bar stool. The wind picks up gently. You pull your cloak tighter. A man passes you going the opposite direction his. Boots fresher, his eyes hopeful. You nod. He nods back. Neither of you say it, but you both know exactly where he's going. And as you keep walking, the tavern shrinks into memory. Not gone, just folded into a quiet corner of your thoughts, next to the sound of dice, the flicker of firelight, and the smell of old straw and warm bread. And somewhere, behind it all, the faintest squeal of a pig, a good omen, a soft farewell. So, now the tavern door is behind you, the road is ahead, and the world has gone a little quieter. The rattle of mugs, the snap of the fire, the hum of half-remembered songs, they all drift away, like smoke curling out of a crooked chimney at dawn. You've eaten. You've listened. You've watched people argue, dance, sleep, and vanish like candlelight when the door creaked open. You've survived the stew, the rats, the dice, and whatever that thing was in the egg. And now, in the hush that follows it all, your body begins to soften. Your legs grow heavy. Your breathing slows. The path before you smooths out into a kind of rhythm. The dust no longer clings. The aches no longer matter. The world doesn't need you to walk anymore. Not tonight. So go ahead. Let your limbs melt into the bed beneath you, whatever century you're lying in. Let the glow of the hearth flicker behind your eyelids. Let the clink of a mug on wood become the heartbeat that lulls you deeper. The tavern is still there, somewhere, in a town that smells like onions and smoke and freshly spilled ale. The fiddler might still be playing. The monk might still be writing. Agnes is probably napping near the hearth, snoring gently. And you're part of it now. So rest. Let it fade. Let it all go quiet. Sweet dreams.